Produced by Podcast Architects.
Welcome back to The Path Forward. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Rick Fernandez, where we talk about education, innovation, and blurring the lines between all things jobs, workforce, and leadership. So I'm in Victoria, Texas. First time I've actually no, that's not true. We chatted virtually, but first time in person. I'm here with Dr. Quentin Shepard, Superintendent of Victoria ISD. So welcome to the show.
Well, welcome to Victoria. We're glad to have you.
You know, you guys have got some great things going on. It's part of why I wanted to visit, and also you're pretty fluent in social media and messaging and some of the creative and innovative things that I've seen you do, which also, I want to learn as we have the conversation. But let's talk about your why, right? Why are you doing this? Why did you want to be an educator? And did your K-12 experience connect that? Did it make you, all right, this is my path? You know, can you merge those two a little bit, or maybe they're just too divergent, somewhat like mine?
No, there's some connection there. I think it's a great question. What's the why? How did it come to be? I couldn't have answered that question, obviously, in my teens. I couldn't have answered it in my 20s, and frankly, I'm not sure I could have answered it in my 30s. I really couldn't. I was on this path, right? And I knew that the path was pulling me in one direction and maybe pushing me in a direction. And then I read a book right about the time I turned 40 called Halftime. Great book. And in that book, he talks about, if you were to put your entire life, every second, every minute, everything you do inside of a box, and you had one word to describe that box, what is it? What's that word? And it took me less than a second. I knew the answer to that question. And I don't know if it had just occurred to me over time, 2 decades of thinking about it, or what it was, but it was just the way that he phrased it in that book. And I was like, that's fascinating. And then he goes on to say, well, that box, it's not what you think about, it's not what you do. It literally defines every aspect of your life. Mm-hmm. It is your life. Right? And I'm like, oh, this is really cool. And it absolutely speaks to me. And I've asked other people the same question, and sometimes they struggle to find the answer, so I won't put you on the spot.
No, you can ask.
But for me, the box is really, really simple. It's all about potential.
Yeah.
From the minute my eyes wake up in the morning, I'm thinking, what's my personal potential today? I'm an exercise fitness enthusiast. You earn your PhD and growing school boards and growing schools and kids and teaching and virtually every aspect of my life. If I see potential, I'm all in.
Sure.
I'm all in. And so that's really, I think, what drew me into education. I love the phrase that goes, boys always grow up to do what their mothers want them to do, but they do it in a way their fathers would have done it.
Yeah.
Which I think there's a lot of truth.
There's a lot of truth in that.
There's a lot of truth there. My mom was a school teacher,
okay.
And she always knew I was going to go into education, even though I was somewhat resistant to it. It turns out she's right, but quickly I found myself being drawn towards administration.
Very nice. Very nice. You can put me on the spot.
Okay, I'm going to do it.
I like
put
that
you on
question.
the spot. What's the box?
I have thought about this because as a former superintendent, high school principal, assistant superintendent in some great districts, and now changing careers in midstream, right? It's always been about the challenge, right? And every step of the way, there's been a lot of, I don't know if that's a good idea. Do you really want to do that? I don't know. That usually doesn't work out. And this is from your colleagues and people that you trust. And I always, to me, when I hear that, I'm like, no, I think I'm like a coach, right? It doesn't matter what the challenge. I can take it and figure it out and make it work. And that's always been how I've approached it. And so when a new opportunity came, obviously, you've got 20 years in. You're going to change in midstream, and what's that going to mean? And I said, it means opportunity.
Challenge is opportunity.
It's opportunity. Chaos is opportunity. Challenge is opportunity. And boy, have we been hit with it in the last couple of years, particularly educators.
That's a fact. Fact.
So you're an exercise. So you're a runner.
Yeah. For years, I was like a marathon / ultra marathon runner.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah. I was turning in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles. I somehow got it in my head that I wanted to circumnavigate the equatorial circumference of the globe twice before I turned 40. I didn't listen to podcasts or anything. It's just me out with,
Oh, you're just your thoughts, huh?
yeah, just a lot of quiet time with me, which is its own sort of disaster. But I did that, and obviously now my knees and hips are mostly shot. So I bike, I lift, I do some boxing, I swim.
You're skateboarding
Yeah,
some of those miles.
If there's some sort of athletic activity, I'm generally into.
That's awesome. So I am the polar opposite. I played college basketball, played high school, but I played more basketball as a kid growing up. I mean, and loved every minute of it. But never was it, hey, let me go run, right?
Yeah.
And I remember we were training, and part of the preseason training was doing a lot of miles. And my coach was like, hey, you're going to get to a point where you get this runner's high. I'm like, what? And I have never.
Not everybody gets that.
Oh, I thought some cross country coach made that up in the 70s to try to get the kids to run or something, because I have never experienced. I've almost passed out a couple times, but that is probably not what people are talking about. So no, I think.
But I didn't grow up that way. I grew up on a working farm with brothers and so on and so forth, and I was actually a pretty big kid. When I went into college, I was well north of 300 pounds and not super athletic. I played on the football team and all the rest of this stuff, but I was a fine arts kid, really. That was what I did through high school. That was what I enjoyed more than the sports or anything else. And we worked hard on the farm, but we were steak and potatoes at every meal and what have you. And then I slowly got into running and slowly got into weightlifting and some of those other activities. And it turns out, buried beneath that 320 pound sort of fat dude, there was this rather healthy athletic guy waiting to get out.
Do you remember what was the tipping point there? Do you remember a certain things like, all right?
Oh yeah, I love telling this story. It was the first time that I met what would be my future wife. It's going to take me a second.
She's going to love this.
No, I tell it all the time. She tells it too. I was the president of the Honor Society when I was a freshman in college, and it was the banquet dinner or whatever.
Okay.
And she was invited as a guest of a friend, and so she sat across the table from me. And I, like, the second I laid eyes on her, I was like instantly in love, and I just knew that this is the woman I'm meant to be with for the rest of my life. So I got her phone number and reached out and called her, and she blew me off.
Wait, you're skipping all the good details. So what's the line? Give me the line as you're sitting there at the banquet. Do you remember?
Gosh, I don't even remember the line. I was so overwhelmed. Like, I don't even know if there was a line. I'm not sure I had a conversation with her. It was just like,
I just check yes or no, huh?
I just knew. And so I reached out to her, maybe reached out to her a second time, never heard back. And then was like, deep down I knew, because I'd seen it in other people too. She didn't see me for who I was. Right? And it's like, we talk about kids all the time. Like, this is a real thing. And so I was like, okay, I want for her to be able to see me for who I really am. And so that means that I have to shed this exterior that allows some people not to be able to see me.
Right.
And so it was about 3 years later. Now I don't see her. I don't run into her. She just disappeared, went on her way. She wasn't a music student or anything else. And 3 years later, she joins choir her senior year in college. And this was my last semester before I was set to graduate. And I run into her in the hallway one day, and I'm like right back where I started, and reached out to her, and she returned my phone call that time. And
Did she know? Did she know it was you? Did she remember the initial?
Not at first, which is awesome. It is so fantastic. And like months later, we were talking about marriage. Not even that. Like weeks later.
How long after the second time that you had the opportunity did you tell her that, hey, by the way, you blew me off?
Oh, pretty quick. Like within a month, I told her. Like, just
once you're on safe ground, you're like,
yeah. And then a couple months later, we're talking about getting married, and it's been awesome ever since. She's the best thing ever happened to me.
Hey, you've got to have that support system, no doubt. I mean, it. You've had some moves, and it's part of the job, and likewise, that support is so critical. So, your first superintendent job was Iowa, yes?
No, Illinois.
No, okay. Take us through a little bit of that, your job.
So just real quick, I started as a teacher in Central Illinois, and I was pre-K through 12 music. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So you had the whole...
The 3-year-olds and the 18-year-olds, tiny little school. I could literally walk across the street from the high school to the elementary school, and loved it. Did that for about 5 years. Really small school. The highlight of the experience was my final year as a teacher. Our high school choir was good enough to be able to tour New York City. We performed for the United Nations while they were in session, performed at Ground Zero. I mean, some really, really cool stuff that you wouldn't expect from a really small rural high school choir, but that was really cool. And so from there, I had an elementary principalship in a small district, still Central Illinois, and then a high school principalship, and then my first superintendency. And it was about 2,000 kids in the district, which is great because then you get to do everything.
You get to learn a ton, right?
You have some assistants in the office, but when it comes to food service, you're it. Yeah. When it comes to transportation, curriculum, personnel, finance, you name it, it's on you. And it's frustrating because you know you can never be great at anything because
Right.
you're just spread far too thin. But you start to learn like these one or two areas where I might be pretty good. And you learn what it takes to run a school district, which is fantastic. And then from there, I was about 5 years as a superintendent there, had some success with student achievement, had some great success with finances. And we're told in Illinois that if you're any good at your game as a superintendent, that you get called up, closer to Chicago.
Right.
That's where the big leagues
Chicago
are.
Public, right?
Yeah, and all the schools that surround it in the collar counties and what have you. And so a headhunter reached out to me and said, hey, you're doing some really good work down there in central Illinois. We'd love for you to come up and meet the school board. And it's the first suburb you drive into as you leave the city of Chicago heading northwest, which is Skokie.
Okay.
If you went straight north, it's Evanston, and then Skokie if you went northwest. And so I went up and met with that board. And at the time, they were ranked amongst the 10 worst performing districts in the state of Illinois. And it was fascinating to me. It was more of an intellectual fascination than anything else because the district had changed so much over the previous decade. It had gone from being very, very affluent to being a really high minority status district, which meant that they were getting a lot of ELL students.
Yep.
And so they were bringing on a lot of ELL support staff,
Right.
and they were basically following a pull-out model, which is 100% the right thing to do. I would have done the same thing. But see, the problem was, as they were getting more and more students and more families and more staff, it was costing more and more money.
Right.
And we're pulling kids out of the classroom. So if you've got a class of 20 kids and you're pulling 10, 15 of them out of the classroom for, pull-out instruction, then they're missing what's happening in the classroom. And you can see how academically it's going to struggle and financially that it's going to be a real problem. So when I showed up about 30 days on the job, and I had to stand in front of the board in the community and say, look, we've got less than 30 days cash on hand. Like, it's either pay the light bill or pay the teaching staff. And we've got to think about what a program overhaul might look like.
Sure.
So long story short, 5 years later, 6 years later, 6 years later, we had moved to a push-in model, which allowed us to reduce approximately 40% of the staff, and that releasing 40% of the staff had a zero student impact on the classroom, the classroom
outcomes,
classroom teacher ratio.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah, we could release that much staff, and the classroom teacher ratio stayed exactly the same.
wow.
That's how many staff we were
yeah.
carrying. And then what happened is the kids, instead of being 6 years in ELL programming before they became English proficient, it dropped to something like 3.7 years. And so their academic achievement went up as a result. And it's like, oh, this is great. Finances went through the roof, and academic achievement, we closed more than a decade's worth of gaps. And so then from there, I was recruited to Iowa for a bit and spent some time there, learning a different system and a different way to do it. And then a few years later, I got called and said, hey, you want to come down to Texas and meet some folks? And the rest.
So what was your initial thought, like coming to Texas?
My I'll tell you, the God's honest truth, my first initial thought coming to Texas, I had moved from Illinois, Chicago, where we were having polar vortexes and 18 inches of snow.
Oh, it's brutal there. I've been to games, and
it's awful. And I moved across state lines, which is a huge thing for educators to do. And I chose to move to a state that basically had the same climate. So when Texas called, I'm like, sure. And then I get down here and I'm like, this is actually a cool way to set up schools. There's some things that are very much like my time in Illinois, things that make a lot of sense. There's some really unique challenges specific to Texas. There was a really unique challenge here, a potential here in Victoria. It was right after the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey.
Yeah.
I've had a career of bringing very specific innovation, mostly strategy innovation to school districts, and I thought that might apply in this context and in this environment. It was a mutual fit.
Well, good. No, so hurricanes, obviously, you're probably going from snowstorm and blizzards to now hurricanes, but particularly on the coastline where we're sitting. It seems like right down the pike. So let's talking about disasters. Obviously, we've been just battered for 2 years. Teachers, districts, students. I mean, you name it. It's been a rough go for COVID. While absolutely we've had to do some things and rethink some things, but I'm one that always believe there's always, when chaos is happening or something's happening that's unexpected, you can either sit and lament and worry about all the things that you have no control over, or you can find the opportunities to innovate.
Yeah.
And this has given us, I believe, a great opportunity as educators. It's really everybody, not just educators, but to spur some innovation. And one of the questions I wanted to ask is, so you're an innovative guy. As you're seeing the pandemic unfold, are there a couple of things that you thought, all right, this is a good space for us to push a little bit, or hey, let's bring this on? So share a little bit about that if you would.
Yeah, several thoughts about that. One of the things that the pandemic allowed for, if we step back, that's the best way to kind of, at least to start with. I think if you step back from the pandemic and kind of what happened in the space during the pandemic, there's lots of different ways to think about innovation, but one way to think about innovation is to recognize the difference between product innovation and strategy innovation.
Right. Yeah, there's two separate things. I think some people get it confused. They hear innovation, they automatically assume it's technology.
Yeah, right.
But it just can be a great idea that has not been executed, right?
So there was not really a whole bunch of product innovation that happened as a result of the pandemic. Like we had Zoom before, right? We had the digital conference.
Yeah. We had varying degrees of, because I was still on.
That's my point.
Yeah.
It was an opportunity for strategic innovation.
Yes.
How can we use this differently? How can we think about this differently? How can we apply this differently? And I think just a background in innovation, I would say that came to me pretty quickly, that this is an opportunity for strategic innovation. Forget about this notion of product innovation. We were getting, tons of folks reaching out to us, telling us, "Oh, we got this new," and I'm like, I'm not interested in the new thing. Like, I'm not bringing on something new for teachers now. I'm not bringing on something like.
Yeah, we got enough on our plates.
We got enough on our plates, and we need to handle that. And then pretty quickly after that, then there was another realization that came to me as it relates to innovation, and I'll try to, apply this in context as well, because I think it's really important for anybody who's watching and listening to this about innovation, is that we say we want to do innovation, and so we try to build innovative schools, but then we need to break that word down a little bit, because it means nothing to nobody.
Yeah.
Right? So what's the difference between adapt versus evolve? Here's how I think about it. Adapt is new users. Evolve is new content. Mm-hmm. Right? And so then we were on the precipice of saying, oh my gosh, we have got to do a virtual education, which means we need new users. Users in this sense could be teachers, or it could be students, or even parents to some extent.
Absolutely.
And so then what are the strategies related to that versus, as the pandemic was going on over the course of the next 2 years, what are our strategies to evolve to build in new content? Mm-hmm. And that's where I see, coming out of the pandemic, that to me is the greatest opportunity, and I hope it's not the biggest missed opportunity that we in education could take out of the pandemic, is that there's so much room for more evolution in this space. The content itself that gets delivered in that space, however it is that we deliver it virtually, which is to the third, I think, innovative realization that I had during the pandemic, is that if you think back to the time when you and I were in the classroom, youngsters, the process of teaching, if you try to distill it down to its most simple, I don't want this to be any more complicated than it absolutely could explain this to a kindergartner. It's basically concentration of information in the teacher's head, right? You sat in a desk and the teacher knew the answer, and then distribution.
Yeah.
And they went up to the board or whatever, however they did it, but it was concentration, distribution. That formula is not changed, really.
No, it's the Industrial Revolution, really.
That's right. And it still hasn't changed even with the advent of technology. Here's how it's changed. The concentration of information is no longer in your head. The best information out there, if you're honest as a teacher, can probably be found online, because there's really, really, really good high quality content out there. And in most regards, it's better than anything I could deliver as a teacher. Yes. But if I can control the distribution network, that's the role of the teacher now. And I'm like, okay, well that's an area where in education, I don't think we've dialed it in just perfectly yet, because there's so much, the concentration part is getting tighter and tighter and tighter, but it's still, if I asked you to go online and find good math lessons for kids.
Right. Yeah, lots. Almost too much overload.
That's exactly the point. So the tighter that gets concentrated, then the role of the evolving role of the teacher is to say, okay, I can control this distribution network. I can help you, Rick, get what it is exactly that you need in the way that you need it, in the time that you need it, and it can be differentiated for everyone.
That's a great viewpoint. I've not considered it in that sense. You mentioned, of course, during the pandemic, every vendor on earth is reaching out, right? And I get it. Business is business, and I think a great deal of them are doing it because they truly want to help, but they also are business. And so we've had teachers come everything under the sun wanting to do this. And even before COVID, that was kind of the pattern, right? Mm-hmm. And my belief about programming is that it's like diets. So when somebody asks, well, which one of them works? I said, well, they all work, right? But which one can you sustain? Which one can you implement with fidelity? Because I always give the cabbage soup. Like, you can eat cabbage soup for 12 days and you're going to lose some weight. But you can't eat cabbage soup for 6 weeks.
That's right.
You're going to keel over. It's the same thing.
That's right.
You go on runs, and that's your. I can't sustain that. That's not going to happen. Like, I'm going to walk out the door, and I'm like, all right, this is good as far as I get to go. So because I love to work out as well, but my work is different. I got to go to the weight room. I got to go shoot shots because I can sustain that.
Well, yeah, and you're touching on something else that's really, really critically important. Maybe a little bit apart from innovation, but it's like, what makes for somebody to be successful, or what makes for an organization to be successful at this new thing? Like, whatever this new thing is, or whatever it is that I'm trying to do, or whatever it is that I'm trying to become. And, we often talk about New Year's commitments or, resolutions or what have you. And it's like, those don't actually work. And there's a big reason they don't work. And years ago, I started to move away from like goal-directed habits. Like, I have this goal to use technology in the classroom, or, whatever it is. Doesn't matter. It's probably not going to work. Like, it's just not. 90% of the time, 95 is an arbitrary number. It's just not going to work. And you think about all the people who missed their opportunities to achieve their goals, and it's probably been true for you. It's definitely been true for me. So these goal-directed habits are sort of an exercise in failure. So how can we be more successful if we actually wanted to do things differently? Like, let's actually say we wanted to manifest real change in a classroom and how a teacher interacts with students, and we don't want to have these goal-directed habits. Well, let's reframe it. Let's reframe it to something simple that all of us, hopefully all of us, do every single day, which is brush your teeth.
Yes.
You brush your teeth every single day because somewhere deep down in your identity, you don't want to be known as somebody who has awful breath. So it doesn't matter if you're at home or if you're traveling,
right,
or anywhere you go, any day of the week, you will brush your teeth in the morning because that's what you do, because it's an identity-directed habit. Now, that's interesting. If your identity-directed habit as a teacher is such that every single day I will have a personal connection with every single student, it's part of my identity. It's who I see myself as a teacher, then you're going to do it, and you don't even have to think about it.
Right. It becomes what we do.
Becomes what we do. Now, so how can we then, back to the innovation question, how can we start to create some identity-directed habits in the minds of teachers as it relates to good instruction from technology?
That's the million-dollar question, because you take brushing your teeth, it's like exercising as well, right? If you go do it and you do it, a great deal in 1 week, you may not see the benefit of it. Right. But you know that over the course of time, all of those habits start to build up. It's harder now to stay the long haul.
Sure.
And because of just, it's different pressures, it's different requirements. We're asking teachers to do a lot in a short amount of time, and there's a lot on us to move the needle. Everybody wants everything now, right? And you can't approach the truly difficult things in life when you're talking about self-directed, eating healthy, those habits, studying, professional development, self-directed, those things are difficult to start and really difficult to maintain. So that's trying to find the catalyst of how do we do that as an organization, right? What's our first little step, and then how do I build in all of the supports to keep us there?
I'm convinced the first step that every organization has to take, if they're serious about this work, and it's one of the things that, like, it seems simple, but
it's a great point.
It takes a lot of work, but I think the first thing that the organization has to do is they have to decouple failure from blame.
Yes.
First. Because if you can't do that, the rest of it is an exercise in futility. Because people are not afraid of failure. Human beings are just not. They're not. Kids aren't, teachers aren't, nobody's afraid of failure. We're afraid of blame, right?
100%.
And that's why innovation does not happen in schools across the country. Like, you find any school district around the country, the reason the innovation is not happening more often than not is because failure and blame are connected. Something went wrong, and whose fault is it, right? So if you can decouple that, then you have the opportunity to fail forward, fail fast, however you want to phrase it. The way we phrase it in Victoria ISD is, I just like the way that the phrase rolls off the tongue, is that we want to reduce the cost of failure so that we can increase the value.
Okay.
right? Because
I like
a lot
that.
of innovation is going to fail. That's just how innovation is supposed to be.
Innovation's messy.
It's messy, and there's going to be points of failure. So you have to embrace that failure. So like, let's just put it in the statement itself. Let's reduce the cost of failure, small projects, and like you get the idea of pilots and everything else. Increase the value. We're a learning organization.
Absolutely. So go with me on this. So in terms of innovation, you're also giving feedback to teachers, part of your leadership, how you do that, right? And it's always been, a transactional, somewhat fearful time for teachers, right? And even on the administrative side, particularly in high school, I can't do calculus, but you're still charged with looking at the instructional practice. That relationship has always been, I think, not near what it needs to be to truly get the bang for our buck, and to reduce it's okay to fail if we're making progress into the ultimate goal of, all right, I'm going to fail, and then I'm going to use this failure to do A, B, and C. And what I always try to liken it to is coaching, right?
Yeah.
If you go out and you're coaching your kid or someone else's kid, and there's going to be multiple times within the week you're going to give feedback, you're going to give praise, you're going to give some critiques for the ultimate goal of this action, right? Whatever this action is on a Saturday or Sunday. But in education, we don't do that. We go in once or twice, or then we ramp up when things go bad. We ramp up like hyper. Now we're in there every day for What about just, hey, it's just coaching, and this is just what we do. You're going to get feedback, right? And you're going to share feedback with me,
for sure.
For
sure. You're practically speaking my love language here. You just nailed several chapters of a book that I just read.
Don't worry, we're going to talk about that. That's still the thunder?
Yeah, no, you hit on some keywords because we use them in education, we use them in life all the time. And here's what you said. Here's what I heard you say exactly, verbatim. You talked about feedback and transactional. Right? Mm-hmm. And absolutely right. And you get that. And here's what you didn't say, but you also inferred, is that when I give you feedback, right, then I'm judging you.
Yes.
And then I'm going to tell you what I want from you. Yes. I need you to stand up to the plate and swing in this way and this and that and then do this and do this and then, and that's what feedback transactional I want from you. All that language is the same. What you're talking about with coaching is what I call the transformational language. Transformational is recognizing that there's a juxtaposition away from feedback, because feedback tells you who you are, but feed forward tells you who you are becoming.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
Right? And so we're very, very clear with our staff that sometimes we are seeking feedback, but sometimes we're seeking feed forward, and sometimes we're seeking both. Like, how do we do on this thing, right, and what should we be doing moving forward? That's coaching. That's transformational. It's the opposite of transactional. It's transformational. And the really cool mental thing that happens in here is if you think about the opposite of this is what I want from you. Mm-hmm. Well, the opposite of this is what I want from you is this is what I want for you.
Yes.
Right? And now we're in deep, deep coaching. Like now we're in compassionate leadership. And you ask, like, how do we make that change happen in the classroom? How do we make it happen with kids? We focus on that side of the conversation that we've kind of not given a lot of due diligence to.
Right. And I think a little bit of it is, so you get your first opportunity as an administrator, and you may or may not have had good models, good mentoring, good coaching. You may or may not have. And so you step in there, and you're only doing probably what your experience has been.
For sure.
Right? Or what you maybe you've learned enough to be dangerous at a service center just to get compliant. And then you're going in and you're trying to help people, and it just doesn't come out right like you want it to, right? Then it becomes adversarial, and it's a position rather than I'm helping you.
And you know why that is? This is fascinating. I'm totally into this now. I'm going to geek out on you just a little bit.
I mean, this coaching feedback is like I love every piece of it. Like I just would.
If you think about right to your first year as a principal or your first year as a teacher, right? Like you didn't actually know what you were supposed to be doing. No. You had some vision of a principal in your head that either was from your days in high school or your days as a teacher or from, God forbid, watching movies. But like you had some version of a principal in your head. And here's what's really cool. This has been backed up by research, and it's decades old. The guy's name is Irving Goffman, 1959, Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. And he talked about how all of us go through life with these mental images in our head. Like a police officer thinks they know what a police officer should be doing and acting and talking and walking and all the rest of that stuff until we get into that role. And then when we get into that role, you said it yourself, it's like the suit doesn't fit.
That's right. I'm not prepared for this.
This is not who I'm meant to be. If this is how a police officer acts, maybe I'm not meant to be a police officer, or maybe I'm meant to be a different type of police officer. That was your experience as a principal. Mm-hmm. That's every single teacher's experience when they walk in the classroom. They're going through this mental image and then this disconnect of what I thought I was supposed to be and what I'm actually meant to be. And this is the rub. This is fascinating to me because it's why I believe that one of many reasons why so many teachers leave the profession after that 3 to 5 year window. Because they get into it and they're in that period of like huge cognitive disconnect.
Yeah.
And then when the support isn't there and we can't sort out what we should be doing, it's just easier to walk away from it and say, this doesn't make any sense to me.
Absolutely. And there's so many pulls and reasons, particularly in this moment, of why that's happening at ridiculous rates. I mean, I'm fortunate to travel all over the country, just talk to a bunch of different leaders, and it's not Texas, it's across the nation. I mean, it's a mass exodus, and there's many reasons behind it, but ultimately, we didn't mentor, we didn't coach, we didn't give them the proper training, the proper feedback, all of it before they step into the classroom, right? And
right.
I noticed that TEA put together, once some feedback got to them, they put together this task force, and it's teachers and it's administrators, superintendents. Like, well, don't you need higher ed in that puzzle as well? Because what about what they're learning at that level, right? That we're hoping that higher ed is preparing them, and they get here and they've had 6 weeks with us or 9 weeks with us as student teachers, and it's no longer working. So everybody has to be a part of the solution.
A little bit more aligned, yeah, for sure. And I think that we're not starting soon enough. One of the things that I'm excited about is we recently kicked off our PTech for education.
So let's jump into that, because I know I will get lost. We'll be here at 9 o'clock talking about leadership feedback, all that stuff. Seriously, and the guys can tell you, like, I'll get sidetracked on that stuff. So obviously, you got some great things going on, and talk to us about some unique programs that you have. PTech obviously is very popular around the state. So dive into it with us.
Yeah, so I can talk details, but I think the best way to frame it up for everyone who doesn't know anything about Victoria is just like let's take a macro view first. Like when I say elementary school, you have a whole host of things that go through your mind about what an elementary
car rider line is my nightmare. No, I'm joking. My own kids. I'm sorry. I'm joking.
I love it. And the same is true for middle school, and the same is true for high school. But these are antiquated paradigms that carry a whole lot of baggage with them, some good and some not so good, and so on and so forth. So I think one of the things that we did very, very conscientiously 4 years ago when I first arrived, almost 5 years ago when I first arrived, was we still have to be known as elementary, middle, and high schools, but let's think about those experiences differently. And what if whenever we said elementary school, we said exposure? Like, we just want to expose kids to careers. We want to expose kids to ways of learning. Right. We want to expose kids to their own genius. Every kid comes to school with a unique genius. Let's expose them to that genius so that they can figure out what that is. And so we start talking a lot about exposure in elementary school. And then you completely think differently about, like, what might that look like in terms of magnet schools or specific campuses that might have a unique genius to the campus itself. And I can circle back and talk about that a little bit if you'd like. But then if elementary school is all about exposure, then middle school, let's call that experience. Because you've been exposed to this thing, and in middle school you kind of know a little bit, like, oh, I'm this type of a learner, I'm a hands-on project-based learner. So let's experience that deeper. Let's talk about a deeper interest. You think you want to be in the trades? Awesome. Let's have some experiences in that. And I think that's not too early to start talking about
Agreed, 100%.
internships and externships,
100%,
immersive learning experience, the whole bit. Same with technology. Like, you should experience this, but we need, as a school district, we need to have on-ramps and off-ramps. And some kids are just in the traditional pathway, and when I say just traditional, I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that's where they learn best.
That's their sweet spot.
They should be in the traditional university-bound traditional classroom experience. So we've got exposure, experience, and then let's reframe high school as pursuit, because that's what high school is at this point. Like, it's pursuit to either military, technical trade school, job certifications, or university, and let's make sure that every student is on a pursuit pathway. And how that manifested for us in a really kind of cool way is we just landed on the ampersand sign, the and, as being deeply meaningful to our district, meaning that every single student who walks across the graduation stage has a diploma in hand, and they've either been accepted to university, or they've got industry certifications ready to go to work on Monday morning, or they're military bound. And that way, that would, to me, be 100% launch rate for our kids, which would be phenomenal. I think any parent anywhere in the country, if a superintendent could say, if you enroll your student with us in kindergarten and leave them in the system for 12 years, I can guarantee you 100% launch rate for your child. That would be a draw.
That absolutely it would be. You're talking very closely to what I believe, because I remember vividly when I was a high school principal, we were going through the mission statement and the vision statement, and I'm not a fan of spending 10 sheets of paper trying to write out this very complicated vision that nobody. I just why are we doing that? So we wanted to do it as a group, and we were boiling it down. And in my mind, I was like, I already know what I think that it is. But we finally got to the point. It's like, what do we exist? Yeah. We exist for one thing, right? When kids leave us, they have options that are suited to their skill set.
Yeah,
that's it. That's all. That's what we want to do. We want to make sure that they don't leave us and with no options on the table.
For sure.
And our job is to figure out what's the best option for each individual kid based on their skill set, what they enjoy, their passion.
And the kids figure out that pathway for themselves. That's
absolutely. We're just guiding. We're just guiding and giving them access, or trying to help them with the path to get there.
Yep.
And
so how that's come to realization for us is we've got some STEM elementary schools, we've got ACE program elementary schools.
What's ACE?
So it's a magnet sort of draw program for our kids.
Okay.
Historically struggling campuses that have been our lowest performing.
Gotcha.
So we kind of build out the full day, breakfast and lunch and dinner in some instances, and keep the kids for after school programming the whole bit. And then at the middle school, we have 2 traditional middle schools, but then we have a blended learning middle school, which we got a huge grant for that, multi-million-dollar grant for that we're building out. And we also have a STEM middle school grant that we've launched. And then at the high school, you already mentioned P-TECHs. We've launched a number of P-TECHs, STEM and T-STEM and education, and we launched healthcare first, and that's going like gangbusters. But then at the same vein, we opened up dual enrollment with UT Austin. We've got
on-ramps.
Yep. We've got dual credit. We've got more kids in dual credit than we've ever had in the history of the district, and they're performing better. We have more kids in dual enrollment than we've ever had. We have more kids in AP coursework than we've ever had, and they're performing better. We have more kids in P-TECH. See, the trick is, like you said, we carved out these pathways, and we're trying to help the kids, their parents, find how they learn best, and then just letting them go, giving them as much gas as they need to hit the pedal. And the answer to how is just more gas. Just more gas. And so you could start in VISD, you could start in kindergarten getting a STEM-based learning pathway education that could carry you all the way through high school, through your graduation day, and then you could literally walk 2 blocks down the street. I don't know if you got a chance to drive by UHV on your way.
I did. Actually, I stopped in there.
See the new STEM building?
Oh, it's beautiful. I stopped in there actually to get on a conference call. And, I'm nosy, so I'm walking around. I went into several of the buildings. It's beautiful. It's unbelievable. And
they just drew a building out of the ground that's a STEM building. And so we've got Victoria College here. We've got UHV right here with a STEM center. And it's one of the largest petrochemical areas in Texas because of where we sit on the Gulf Coast. And I'm like, what an amazing opportunity for kids and families and parents and really our entire community to take advantage of this type of learning pathway, if that's your desire. And if that's not, cool, because you ought to see what we're doing with dual credit and dual enrollment and AP, and like the world's your oyster.
It truly is. I mean, sometimes I feel I'm a little sad that these options weren't available.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, who knows, right? I mean, I can't say that I was going to be in AP classes or anything like that, but I was a very good test taker. I could show up on the day of and make 100, right? Yeah. And may not turn anything in ever, but there was something that I needed that was missed in K-12. I don't know what that was, but there was clearly something. But now, we're removing all the barriers, all the excuses for kids to fail.
That's absolutely right. You're absolutely right about that. And the kids who have that drive, desire, motivation, and if we can help them find it, great, because they're off to the races. And we just need to keep encouraging that.
I know we're off script, but I gotta ask your opinion on it. So part of my role. So I took a new role because of the challenge and because they said, go innovate, go create, don't be afraid to fail. Do what is in the best interest, of K-12, right? I've always believed that education and career, business, industry has been 2 separate siloed entities, and really higher ed for that matter. It's been 3 silos. And so blurring the lines of all 3 of those has always been a passion, and has always been something I've tried to fight hard. And it's hard to do because there's barriers at each level, right? So what I started and what we collectively started at Answer Advisory is we're going to reimagine the internship, and go with me. So we're a huge advisory firm. We've got all of these different sectors: wastewater, energy, project management, architecture, you name it, federal security. Instead of saying, all right, well, that kind of sounds like an engineering kind of career path, and maybe, no, hold on. We've got digital design. We've got people that have to do media and put all this stuff together and press releases. We have to have leadership training. We have to have professional development training. We have to have finance. We have to have legal.
For sure.
Why would we just expose a student to just that vein, right? Because just like you said, I had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up.
Yeah.
And most kids are trying to figure it out, and hopefully, by you guys doing that, they're getting there quicker and with more information to make the choice. But when we get into internship, like the should no longer be barriers of time and space and all of that.
And curriculum.
Why? Why wouldn't you make that a barrier? And CTE curriculum, I love everything CTE. So it is not that hard to match that capstone, and we can make all of the requirements more than fit, right?
For sure.
But we started with an intern, just like, hey man, you're not going to just get the architecture and the engineering.
Yeah.
I understand that but you got all this access to all this different stuff. So instead of that, we're going to take kind of like what you said at the middle school. We're going to give you some exposure, and then we're going to test it out throughout the course of your internship. And so I've been challenging other folks is like, let's do it that way. Let's just see.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, if you want to see that on steroids, I wish we could take a road trip to Iowa. I had the opportunity to see and be a part of one of the coolest educational experiences that I could not have imagined this. And so it was essentially this program that several districts, mine included, got involved with, that said, what if we were to draw a building out of the ground that is not what we think of when we think of traditional schools, but build around like what you said. And it's really project-based learning, but to a degree that most of us can't even comprehend. So that, say for instance, and we actually had students who did this, that wanted to test the algae levels of ponds throughout the Midwest, because there's the sun and whatever, and then it kills off some of the fishes and creates a habitat problem and so on and so forth. But we put a bunch of kids on this project because it's a real world problem that the Farm Bureau is facing, and they're going to help us solve that problem by measuring pH levels in ponds around the country, or around the county. And so what these kids had to teach themselves was photovoltaics, financing, marketing, product management, leadership. I mean, what curriculum couldn't you teach?
You are talking about let's just make a bunch of incubation places for kids.
And that's what it was. And so this thing is called Iowa Big, and Ted Dintersmith drove all over the country. He's a famous entrepreneur, drove all over the country looking at innovative schools, and he actually wrote about that particular school in his book, What Schools Could Be, and it's just remarkable. Now, is that for every kid? No.
No.
But for some kids who are just like all in, and they don't need to know they're learning math. They don't need to know they're learning science. They don't need to know that they're learning marketing. Great. But if we can teach the content and they come out of that and perform really well on state tests, then why wouldn't we do that?
No. So 100% absolutely correct. And even if it doesn't fit a kid per se, right? Spending time with business leaders, CEOs, and hearing I'm always asking, what is it that you're looking for? Talk to our kids about what it is that they need to join and be a part. And so I tried to boil it down for our internship, because it's not what I believe we preach to kids a lot of the times, right? Sure. So reliability, number one, show up, be there. Adaptability, you spoke about it earlier, right? Innovative problem solving, right? Cross-functional teammate. So you can't be siloed. You got to be cross-functional. Because in our firm, like that, we're all over the place, and it's such an invigorating to go see and hear and learn from something I have no experience with.
Sure.
Those components, and if we can wrap it around there, those things are going to take them wherever they decide to go. Yeah. Whether it's traditional, whether it's a magnet, whether they want to go to Harvard, or whether they just want to get out and work.
Right.
Those things are critical to what the evolution of the workforce is going to become. I mean, already is. Yeah. Not really what it's going to become. I just get so excited about what if we just really looked at what industry is doing.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Pull them in just a little bit more. We're talking a little bit about essentially transforming schools, being innovative and really looking future forward. I like that feedback forward. Dang it, that's pretty good.
Yeah, take it.
So, but with that in mind, I know you don't want to talk about it, but I'm going to ask because I'm an avid reader. 750 weeks in a row on my Kindle. So I want to ask about the book. Why'd you decide to write it? What do you want folks to get out of it? And what's it kind of meant to you? And give me the title.
Yeah.
I know what it is, but I want you to say it because it may put you on the spot. I like that.
The Secret to Transformational Leadership. You can find it on Amazon. A couple weeks ago, it's now released on Audible. So
I know.
Listen to it on your car.
I did because I got a 2-hour drive. I was listening to it on the way up here. So
fantastic.
I didn't want to pander, and make it seem like that. So I wasn't going to throw that in there unless you asked me.
It's cool. I realized going into the pandemic, this is something I'd always wanted to do. And I had false started several times, actually. And in my head, I've been writing this book for probably close to 15 years. I've been a superintendent for almost 18, 19 years now. And I've been writing it in my head for years, different parts and different chapters. And essentially, I'm fascinated by this notion of the language that we use within leadership. And we use the wrong language in the wrong context. And I was trying to sorting it out in my mind and so on and so forth. And it was slowly coming together. But I just didn't see myself as a writer. Back to that thing we were talking about earlier, identity-based habits versus goal-based habits. And I met Sarah Williamson through an event and an organizer and so on and so forth. And she's out on the West Coast, and she provided this structure. She offered to provide the structure. And she was my accountability partner.
Yeah.
You're going to turn in these chapters at this time and so on and so forth. And then some of the stuff that I wasn't so keen on doing, she was up for the task. And so we worked out an agreement, and I just wrote like mad. And so the actual writing itself was like 6 months, maybe a little bit longer than that. But it came together really quickly. Now, of course, it was 15 years of thinking about it at that point. I really felt like the time was now to put this book out there because of how quickly education was changing during the pandemic, especially. And I was watching so many leaders who were just falling flat on their face in front of their community in ways that they didn't intend to. Of course, nobody sets out to do that, but it just seemed like a misstep or a misunderstanding, and it was because they were using this antiquated paradigm of leadership and how they were trying to approach the problem. I say all that so I can say this. It essentially, the book lays out this notion that there are only two types of problems that come to a superintendent's desk, right? And really any CEO, if you think about it. They're either complicated or complex. And if they're complicated problems, there's one right way to do it, and you have a staff, and they should have some expertise, and it better be right. I mean, it's fair. That's to what you said earlier about competence. That falls in the world of complicated. But complex are inherently unknowable. It's the best way to educate kids during a pandemic.
Right.
I don't know. When's the best time to go out for a bond? How much should we go out for? Should we rezone the district? Should we build new schools? The list of complex questions is endless. And so my conjecture is let's use a different language when we're faced with the complex, and let's try to be transformative in that space. And so my hope is that this book, for somebody who's a sitting and established leader, that they can say, oh, that makes some sense. And maybe there's a phrase or two, and I'm very specific about the language that we use in that book. So like maybe there's a phrase or two that you say, yeah, I'm going to actually adopt that because it makes sense in this context where I should be using it. And then of course for the up and coming leaders, because I also, in all my free time, I also teach aspiring leaders. And so I have the opportunity to be in front of teachers who want to be building principals and maybe someday work at a district level. And so I thought, you know what, I want to put something out there in the space that says, okay, let's advance the conversation 1 millimeter in this direction so that aspiring leaders can see in themselves, oh, there is a different way to lead in the public space, and it's safe to do so.
Right. And that's hard. That's very hard for rookie. And I'll take my own, example of all the things that you don't know that are not easily articulated, even because you lean on your colleagues and you lean on people that have experience, and it's difficult. There is a need for that help and that guidance, and people are busy. It's tough to come by, but it is very much needed. I always ask and see to anytime I listen to someone speak or a lecture or professional development, is there one action, if you were to take one action for an up-and-coming leader to take out of the book and say, if you do nothing else, try this? Is there one thing that you can think of?
Yeah.
It's like, boom, do this one.
For sure. It would be back to what we said before. Just focus on that language from what I want from you, because especially as an early career administrator, that's so easy to do.
Yeah.
It's so easy.
You're so right.
every single problem that comes across your desk. Here's the rub. It's a beautiful thing if you think about it. Like somebody, when you were a teacher, when I was a teacher, every administrator I know, when we were a teacher, we were really good at solving problems and organizing people. And because you have those two really great skill sets, some administrator tapped you on the shoulder and said, you should think about going into administration,
Yes.
right? That very moment was the day that your greatest strength became your greatest weakness.
Yes. Yes.
Because
Absolutely.
the first day on the job as a principal, somebody's going to present you with a problem. And if you solve that problem, they're going to bring you another one. And then they're going to bring you another one. And then they're going to bring you another one. And so you have to resist the temptation to be really good at that thing that you're really good at so that you can stop and think and help grow other people, right? And then recognize that the world is a complex place. Because if you believe that every single problem is complicated, eventually you're going to step in it.
Yes. You're absolutely right. That is me to a T. Like
It was all of us.
I love the feeling of the solution.
Right.
You know what I mean? Even during the pandemic, like all of this stuff shuts down, and I'm trying to like, what's the solution? We've got to move all PD, summer PD to online. Let's start breaking it down. Let's look at master schedule so we can go 80-20 virtual. And
so this is a really cool human phenomenon. It's really cool, and I love to talk about this because what you're experiencing in that moment is closed in knowing. You're closed-minded and you know the answer. You've done some Google research or you have some background history or whatever. It doesn't really matter. Great. And I want to honor closed in knowing because I'm closed in knowing too. And so I want to find ways that we can bring hundreds, if not thousands of people together to be closed in knowing. Mm-hmm. I'll use the pandemic response plan as an example. So we brought together, I think it was close to 700 teachers on a mega Zoom. And we said, we don't know what to do. Like we've never educated during a pandemic. What do you think we should build into our pandemic response plan? And so those 700, we crowdsourced their ideas. So, they all share their ideas, and then the highest rated ones go to the top.
Right.
And then we took those top rated ideas and we wrote out a pandemic response plan, which is essentially just their language, just kind of tightened up a little bit. And then we went and we got, I don't know, several hundred kids on a Zoom. Can you imagine that? Middle school and high school kids.
Yes.
And we said, this is what your teachers wrote. What are your thoughts and concerns as it relates to the pandemic response plan? And then we went out to another several hundred parents and we said, this is what our teachers wrote and our kids reviewed and what questions do you have? And so by doing that, what I did is I took every single person, 100% of the people who wanted to be involved and said, you get to be closed and knowing and tell us what to do. And then I'm going to take you through a door where you're open and learning. Right? Open-minded and learning. Mm-hmm. And then together we're going to figure out what's best. And it's not about who's the loudest or who's the smartest. It doesn't really matter. We just want the best idea. And anytime we can walk a person or a group or an organization through closed and knowing to open and learning, that's transformation.
I like it. I like it a lot. And bringing the kids in, I know people, sometimes we do that as a forward public-facing showing, but kids are always, will rise to the occasion.
Yep. Every time.
If you ask them, they will definitely tell you exactly what they feel.
Can I share a story about rising to the occasion?
Yes, quickly.
A quick story.
They're giving me
we have to wrap it up.
They're giving me the hook.
This is a great place to finish.
Okay.
So you talk about rising to the occasion. We have a DAEP program, credit recovery program, just like every school in Texas, right? Credit recovery. You know that these students are more often than not on a dropout track, right? Like they're just struggling to get credits, and it's a real struggle through high school.
Absolutely.
We use the pandemic as a wonderful opportunity to say, what if we were to think differently about how we do this? And so we essentially rented out 6 classrooms on the local community college campus, and we said to these students, you're going to community college from here on out. You never go back to that other campus. We're going to continue to enroll you in credit recovery and so on and so forth, and we're going to give you the opportunity to enroll in community college. We'll cover all your costs. We're going to give you a ton of support. We're going to give you a bunch of adult support like you've never had before and academic support like you've never had before. Our expectations are unmatched to anything you've ever experienced in your school before, but this is your golden ticket because we believe in you and we love you and we want to help you succeed. And of the kids, 100+ kids that we put there under this experiment, 100% of them enrolled in college.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
Kids will rise to the occasion.
Every single time. They're resilient, they're adaptable, and they will rise to the level of the adult expectation every single time. One rapid fire, I always do like a rapid fire just to see, get your response. All right, so let's pretend it's your birthday. All right.
Okay.
You get $1 million. You have to spend every penny.
Brewster's Million.
Yeah, there you go. Or community chest, like I think of Monopoly, right? $1 million. Here's the rub. You can't spend it. You got to pick somebody on your staff to spend it in your best interest for your birthday. Who do you choose on your you could say your cabinet or your leadership team here. Who do you choose and why?
Wow. Golly, that's Like, I can't even fathom an answer.
It's not your CFO. They didn't invest it for you. No, I'm joking. No, I'm joking.
No, I divided up equally amongst.
Oh, you got to pick one. Come on.
I have to pick one.
Yes.
I'd be really, really.
And it's got to be a selfish gift. It's no like, hey, can you, I'm giving it to the poor. No, this is totally selfish.
So I'm going to give it to a staff member who's going to decide how to spend it?
Yes. You got to choose who understands you the best amongst your team that would know if it was just purely selfish and it's a gift for him. Who are you picking?
Golly, I guess the person I'm picking is Melissa Carell, but not for the reason that you said. The reason that I would pick Melissa Carell on my staff is because she so often surprises me with how she thinks. So she would spend it on something that I'm not sure. Like, I would make a prediction about how she'd spend it.
You'd be curious.
And she'd be doing something different, and I'd be like, that's fascinating. What can I learn from that? I would want to do it that way because she shocks me so often with her thinking and really sometimes disrupts and sometimes dislodges my thinking.
So you're saying out of curiosity?
Mostly out of morbid curiosity. It's like an experiment.
I'm sorry, Melissa. I didn't know that was going to go that way.
She knows I'd say that, and she loves it.
That's fantastic. I mean, I hate to end it right here, but I'm trying to keep us on time. I know, obviously, you're a busy guy. Got a million things to be doing, but we've got to figure out how to come do part two. Like, I got to dig into the leadership component.
Cool.
You
I'd
tell
like
us
that.
when. Yeah. No,
It's been fun.
It's been real fun. And the guys are great, and they'll do a great job with the show. And this is started off doing this for no other reason than I just wanted to talk about education with my friends.
Yeah.
And it's kind of evolved in this. So
That's really cool. Groovy. Thanks, man.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Produced by Podcast Architects.